Industries, Pashupati Kumar Paras. The meeting discussed ways to enhance the stability and cohesion of the international financial architecture and how to make it capable of addressing the global challenges of the 21st century. Our correspondent Amritpal Singh reports from Chandigarh.
The first meeting of the International Financial Architecture Working Group of G20 under India's G20 presidency kicked off in Chandigarh on Monday. Inaugurating the conference, Union Agriculture Minister Narendra Singh Tomar said the challenges being faced today are global in nature and require global solutions. Therefore, the world community today needs to push more towards globally coordinated policies and actions.
इस बैठक के माध्यम से सामान्य तौर पर ये कोशिश रहती है कि वित्तीय क्षेत्र में जो वैश्विक चुनौतियां हैं उन चुनौतियों को समाधान कैसे दिया जा सकता है। जो कमजोर वर्ग के लोग हैं, जो विकास की दौड़ में पिछड़ गए हैं, उनके साथ न्याय कैसे किया जाए, उनको संतुलित कैसे किया जाए, बराबरी के स्थान पर कैसे लाया जाए, ऐसे प्रमुख विषय इन बैठकों में रहते हैं। जो चुनौतियां वैश्विक हैं उनका निश्चित रूप से सामूहिक रूप से विचार विमर्श करके समाधान हो और वैश्विक ही निदान की नीति बने तो इससे पूरी दुनिया को फायदा होगा।
Union Minister Pashupati Kumar Paras said during India's G20 presidency, it is our responsibility to advance progress and ensure that the international financial architecture today is well equipped to meet the acute challenges and provide maximum support to vulnerable groups. The International Financial Architecture Working Group is one of the most important working groups under the G20 finance track, which focuses on strengthening international financial architecture. South Korea, which is co-chair at the first International Financial Architecture Working Group meeting, described India as global powerhouse. It also said that India is a soft power equipped with films, cuisines and history.
The impression of this country is that India is undeniably a global powerhouse. Not only is it a hard power, evidenced by economic scale and population, but also a soft power equipped with well-known films, cuisines, history, and renowned figures. I'm sure that the Indian presidency will unleash its potential and charm during its term and pay heed to insights and feedback from members and contribute to the international community.
On the sidelines of the meeting, the Reserve Bank of India on Monday also held a meeting on central bank digital currencies. The meeting also allowed countries to share their experiences and develop a deeper understanding of the wider implications of CBDCs. The working group meeting was attended by IFA co-chairs France and South Korea.
With the global economic downturn affecting almost all countries around the globe, it is the least developed ones that are most vulnerable, and therefore the need to strengthen the international financial architecture. And this is precisely what this development working group is trying to do here in Chandigarh under India's G20 presidency. With cameraman Alok Gupta, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Chandigarh.
Our correspondent Amritpal Singh spoke exclusively to G20 delegates on the issues that were taken up for deliberations at the meeting. Let's listen in.
As the meeting of the International Financial Architecture Working Group of G20 is currently underway here in the beautiful locales of Chandigarh, I have with me delegations from France and Canada to talk about that. First of all, about the agenda, how do you think G20 could work towards strengthening the international financial architecture?
The objective of this working group is to support the ambition of the G20 Indian presidency. It is a working group dedicated to the financial architecture, so multilateral development banks, IMF, looking also at capital flows. They are working hard to use the existing resources, to mobilize the existing instruments, and also to think what can be different, what can be more innovative in order to strengthen the institutions.
The countries who are less developed or least developed are more vulnerable to these economic shocks. So how could the G20 work towards seeing that they are relatively taken care of or ensured in that sense?
Indian presidency this year, with the strong co-chairmanship of France and Korea, this group can work at making sure that the countries that are most in need are actually getting the support that they can get, with working on efficiency of the resources that we have at our disposal, working with multilateral development banks, for example, and looking at the capital that we're putting in those banks and making sure that we're making the best use of the resources.
Debt vulnerability is one of the issues. So how can G20 collaborate to see that there is more debt transparency, and their debt vulnerabilities can be covered?
No, of course, it's a great question, and I think something like 60% of low-income countries now are in debt distress, which is hugely problematic. But I think the G20 is coming together now with a common framework for debt suspension service initiative, and I think meetings like this are super important to get everybody together and to get countries on the same page to help these countries. We've seen so far 3 countries come through for the common framework, and hopefully we will see more coming through.
So let's now understand what the problem is vis-a-vis the governance structure of World Bank and IMF. But before that, let me take you through what the Prime Minister had to say on the need for reform of global institutions. He said that the challenge for poor citizens of every country is more severe. Every day, life has already become a struggle for them. So this is what the Prime Minister said, leading on to say that they do not have the financial capacity to deal with the double whammy. And due to the double whammy, they lack the financial capacity to handle it. He also said that we should also not hesitate to acknowledge that multilateral institutions such as the United Nations have been unsuccessful on these issues, and they have all failed to make suitable reforms in them. So Prime Minister making a pitch for reforms of the global architecture as a whole, including the United Nations. Let's now take a look at how the governance structure of IMF and World Bank is like. Well, they continue to remain the bastion of the West. How? We'll tell you more about it. Let's move to the next slide. Both IMF and World Bank are controlled by boards where voting power depends on economic size of their member states. So the bigger the economy, the more the voting power they will have in IMF and World Bank. So there is stark asymmetry, as the United States government has a vote share of 16% in the IMF. So 16% vote share only the United States have in the IMF board. Also, Ethiopia, for instance, is home to over 100 million people, but it controls only 0.09%, not even 0.1% of votes in the IMF. So you may have a bigger population size, but that has nothing to do with the voting part, because that has only got to do with the GDP size. World Bank is always led by an American, so that raises a question on the leadership of the World Bank as well. And the IMF is led by a European. Again, that raises a question on why should the IMF and World Bank be led by either Americans or Europeans. Both are headquartered in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. And what else do we know about the IMF and World Bank? Both employ many economists from high-income countries. So many economists from high-income countries are there. Where is the representation of the global south? That is the big question. Governance structure is favoring developed countries, and that needs to change urgently. And this is an opportune moment for India to make that happen. There is a need for reform in view of the rise of emerging economies. So this cannot be overemphasized. Growing consensus that Bretton Woods institutions no longer represent new geo-economic realities, and hence the need for reform. Our correspondent Amritpal Singh, who's tracking the developments very closely in Chandigarh, is joining us for more inputs. Amrit, why have reforms remained stuck so far, and what role do you see India playing as G20 president to accelerate the process? Can you hear me, Amrit? Right, we'll try and go across to Amritpal Singh, but we've given you a picture of the governance structure of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And our correspondent Amritpal is back with us. Amrit, I was asking you that why have reforms remained stuck, and what role can India play as G20 president to accelerate the process?
Munmun, could you repeat your question, please?
Okay, repeating the question, why have reforms in the global financial institutions remained stuck, and what role can India play as G20 president to accelerate the process?
Okay, reform has been stuck for the same reason that reform have been stuck in the Bretton Woods institutions. You know, they have been heavily loaded in favor of the Western countries, basically, or the developed world, basically, because they are bigger contributors to the development banks. They are bigger contributors to bodies like the World Bank, like the IMF, etc. So they control. They are more powerful nations, so to speak. But now what, as the developing world increasingly its voice is getting heard in G20, in an organization, in a grouping like G20, as they come to play a more important role, they become more assertive, saying that you have to be more attuned to the needs of the global south, and India has given that a push and emerged as a voice of the global south, and it's one of its priorities to put the aspirations and needs of the global south at the heart of G20. So they are coming to play an increasingly important role. For example, in the way debts are lent, the way debts are recovered. Now these are things which are more tilted or are not in a very not very favorable to poorer economies or developing markets who don't have those kind of deep pockets, but for their developmental needs their debt to GDP ratio is high. So these bodies need, these banks need to understand that they cannot deal with them in the same manner that they deal with the developed world, and say that look, your debt to GDP ratio has to be to this level for us to lend to you. Well, these are developing countries, they've got developing needs, they need to spend on development, they need to spend on infrastructure, they need to feed their people. So slowly that narrative is changing, and India is utilizing its presidency, the leverage of its presidency to bring to sharp focus issues like these. And it is precisely the reform, the strengthening of these international institutions, the banks, the multilateral banks, was what was deliberated today on day 1 and shall continue tomorrow on day 2 of the conference.
Absolutely, and there were discussions on central bank digital currencies as well. Like you said, the debt situation of various countries was also discussed. Having said that, I understand that there is a target also that developing countries are pursuing of finalizing some sort of a reform quota formula of the IMF by 15th December this year. Need to know more on how these deliberations are expected to progress tomorrow, which will be the second and final day of the meeting.
Well, okay, what happens on that reform or on that quota system is basically the IMF, all countries contribute to the IMF. And obviously those, and every country has a quota depending upon their GDPs, the scale of their GDP, how rich or poor the country is. Now every 4 years that is reviewed, though that is done at the IMF level. But G20, being an important grouping of the 20 biggest economies of the world, has a very powerful say in it. So what G20 is trying to do is see if they can have a consensus on what should be the quota system that is fair and equitable and also based on needs. As the Prime Minister said that one of the priorities of the Indian presidency would be that they would want to push for help according to the need of the country, and that is where the developing countries or the least developed economies need a much more hand holding than those who are already well off. So, in that quota system review, I mean, on the talks of the quota system, though they directly, it's not just the G20, it is the IMF level where it will happen, but they'll try and emerge a consensus as to what should be the formula for that review.
Absolutely. So more deliberations expected on the same tomorrow. Thank you so much, Amrit, for joining us and sharing your perspective and inputs from Chandigarh. On Sunday, on the eve of the meeting in Chandigarh, G20 delegates were served a sumptuous millet dinner. So the welcome dinner of the first International Financial Architecture Working Group meeting in Chandigarh continued the milletful trend, so to say. Millets for the G20 delegates to savor once again. An exhibition of traditional handicrafts of the region for the G20 delegates was also organized on the sidelines. Phulkari, the folk embroidery of Punjab, was a major attraction there. A millet hamper was also gifted to all the delegates. So G20 continues to be a wholesome experience for the delegates. They not only engage in deliberations, but they also enjoy Indian cuisine. They get a sense of India's culture, tourist attractions as well. So this is a wholesome and holistic experience. Last evening, the delegates watched an exhibition of a polo match at the Indian Reserve Battalion ground at Sarangpur. The match was organized by the Polo Club in association with the Chandigarh Police. To celebrate India's presidency and take the idea of G20 to the youth, the Indian Institute of Democratic Leadership organized India's first model G20 summit for the youth at Rambhau Mahalgi Prabodhini's Uttan campus near Mumbai. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant inaugurated the model G20 summit in the presence of Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, President of the ICCR and Vice Chairman of Rambhau Mahalgi Prabodhini, who chaired the inauguration ceremony. A representative of Indonesia was also present on the occasion. While addressing the summit, Amitabh Kant said that G20 countries make for an important forum, which is G20, because the G20 as a whole accounts for 85% of global GDP. It is much more powerful than the UN, he said. He added that while Security Council is dysfunctional on some of the important issues due to various reasons, G20 countries comprising developing and developed countries have provided solutions to various global issues.
I'm sure that all other universities, colleges, institutions will follow this very innovative trend taken by the Rambhau Mahalgi, and in fact instead of just doing UN Model 20, they will now do only G20, and they will substitute UN 20 with Model G20s, because the future is with G20.
Science 20 Inception meeting kicked off in Puducherry. Discussions took place on the use of disruptive science for sustainable development. Director of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, Professor G. Rangarajan, addressed the meeting, saying grand challenges of today and tomorrow, such as climate change, pandemics, water management, energy security and food shortage, can be resolved only through collaborative efforts of nations to share experiences and breakthroughs in science and technology.
The science engagement vertical is a crucial component of the G20 activity. Science and technology are going to play a vital role in furthering the aspirations of G20, which aims to bring nations together to solve global issues. The grand challenges of today and tomorrow, climate change, pandemics, water management, food shortage, cannot be addressed by any one country alone. It requires the collaboration of many different nations so that experiences and breakthroughs in science and technology can be shared with each other.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Saba Qureshi, the President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, on his first visit to India. In the meeting, the Prime Minister reaffirmed India's commitment to multilateralism, including at the United Nations. The two leaders discussed the importance of conserving and optimizing global water resources. And India welcomed Qureshi's support for India's G20 presidency. The UNGA president has already met India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant. He shared photos of his meeting with the G20 Sherpa on Twitter. Both of them discussed measures and solutions devised under India's leadership of the group to support transformation. He termed the G20 as an important platform to exchange ideas and much needed solutions. IIT Madras will host the first G20 Education Working Group meeting at its campus on the 31st of January. The working group will focus on identifying policies for effective use of digital technology in education among the G20 member countries. Just a few reasons on what makes IIT Madras a highly suitable academic partner to host the first ever Education Working Group meeting of G20 Summit in Chennai.
We are super excited to welcome the delegates of G20.
The student community of IIT Madras is very honored to have the G20 Summit this year here.
It is a momentous occasion for us as it marks a new chapter in India's global leadership, and we are super excited to host it.
I think this event will be a landmark in India's educational journey.
And we have put our best foot forward to create a very cherishable and beautiful memories for all the delegates coming for this summit.
We are very excited to host G20 here.
We welcome you and we hope you enjoy our campus.
Atithi Devo Bhava. It's time to celebrate Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. One earth, one family and one future.
The beautiful Chandigarh city has welcomed the delegates by showcasing Bhangra from Punjab and greeted the guests on arrival. We'll leave you with these stunning visuals. Thanks for watching.
The changing world of news. Headlines that you wake up to. News that shapes your day. Stories that matter to you. The latest and most accurate updates. A fresh start to a new day. The Breakfast News, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. on DD India.
पेमेंट फेल लेकिन पैसे तो कट गई मेरी मेहनत की कमाई।
हो जाएगी भरपाई, चिंता मत कर मेरे भाई। अगर डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शन फेल हो जाए और अकाउंट से पैसे कट जाएं, तो बैंक समय से पैसे लौटा देगा, वरना कॉम्पनसेशन का है प्रावधान। नहीं तो आरबीआई के ओम्बुड्समैन को शिकायत करें आप।
Your bill.
मेरी फीस। आरबीआई कहता है
जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Namaste everybody. I'm Susan Ferguson and I'm the UN Women Country Representative here in India. Watch me on DD Dialogue, DD India on the G20 series talking about women-led development in G20.
Namaste. I'm Shambi Sharp. I'm the UN Resident Coordinator in India. Watch me talk about India's G20 presidency and a global push to rescue the SDGs on DD Dialogue on DD India. Looking forward.
Namaskar, we bring to you this world-exclusive edition of DD Dialogue G20 special series from this sprawling campus of United Nations Delhi office. Today we are going to talk about United Nations call to action points and its alignment and convergence with the government of India under India's G20 presidency, with a specific focus on women-led development, because we will be talking to United Nations India Women Representative, and climate action, and most importantly the realization of sustainable development goals and much more. Is India also being seen as a major force to reckon with when it comes to being the global voice of the global south? So what does India really bring to the table under its presidency, and how does United Nations look at India's agenda, especially under the ambit of United Nations? And we have the luminaries here, the United Nations top ambassadors, joining us on the national news broadcaster Doordarshan. Ever smiling, very pleasant Susan Ferguson, thank you so much for talking to us on DD. Namaste and welcome to the show.
Namaste everybody.
Thank you so much, Shambi. About you, they say that you're almost Indian now. You understand the language and you speak also. Swagat hai aapka show mein.
Namaste. हमें यहाँ बुलाने के लिए धन्यवाद.
हमें यहाँ बुलाने के लिए धन्यवाद. Well, that was very, very nice. On that very good note, let me start by asking you, I was just going through some of your articles, features, interviews that you've given earlier, and you've said, Shambi, that it's hard to think of a country better placed to bring on board set of countries, communities,